In the 50s and 60s, economic growth was really shared broadly across the distribution. That changed in the 70s. Since the mid-70s, we've seen rising income inequality to the point where 90% of the population hasn't really seen much income growth in real terms for the last 45 years. Whereas those at the top of the distribution have seen much, much faster income growth. And particularly when you compare that to how the economy used to grow, that difference in growth has been costing the bottom 90% of the population about $2.5 trillion, at least in 2018. And over the course of the last 43 years, that totals to about $47 trillion.
I'd like to show some graphs and info and tell you all my theory. So the Federal Reserve says there's a titanic gap between rich and not rich, even when adjusting for inflation and even doing per capita per each socioeconomic class. There's a big gap between us that's been growing for decades, and by other data has been around since the 70s, a growing class divide while we underwent inflation and corruption of the government and economy. Here's another graph of our federal debt since 1790. After both world wars, the US was rapidly demolishing its debt. Especially after World War II, we were one of 3 major Allied powers, and we had to bail out the British and Soviets during it. After World War II, we spent massively on military, the space race, the highway system, rebuilt Europe after both world wars, garrisoned bases around the globe, and rebuilt much of the world almost like nothing. We were spending exuberantly, and yet we were demolishing our debt like nothing, indicating a very healthy economy. In the 70s, our debt plateaued and then began rising again, while certain areas of Asian economies began rising during and after the 70s. What happened? In my research, my educated understanding, and advocated position, manufacturing, industry, and commerce are the answers. These were Western-dominated in modern times. Ever since the Industrial Revolution began in the mid-1700s, after some colonial world wars and other colonial conflicts, Britain especially, with its vast empire, could have easy access to global resources.
Cash crops, and especially cloth textiles from India, Bengal, and the New England colonies. These textiles from India and Atlantic trade allowed Britain to begin its Industrial Revolution. First, Britain was the prime industrial engine. Then it reached mainland Europe. Later, the US, Japan, and after the World Wars, while Europe and Asia were being destroyed by Axis warfare, the US helped rebuild the world via the Marshall Plan and other efforts. Industry was with Britain, then Europe, then the US, and to an extent Japan. The US remained a major industrial power from the 1910s to the 1970s, when our manufacturing began declining and Asia's industry began truly rising, especially in communist dictatorial China. Look it up, it's awful over there. Even today, China is rising while the US was falling, and that projection continues into recent years. We were good post-World Wars. Then the 70s hit, and offshoring manufacturing jobs to Asia, and also the rise of OPEC, the OPEC, especially Persian Gulf and Islamic countries, began holding their oil hostage and jacking up prices under their terms, while the US and Nordic lands still have access to alternatives to Mideast oil. Check it out here. This isn't to knock on Islam, since the Islamic Caliphate and Emirates were major powers, wealthy with trade opportunities, religious toleration for Christians and Jews, and some native Iranian culture from an initial Arabian empire. It was wonderful for a while. And the gunpowder empires too were powerful Islamic entities, and gave Europe a run for their money until the colonial business got really lucrative for better and worse. All civilizations ought to be equal, but for these United States of America, I look at the evidence and advocate that we stop buying from evil communist China and begin to work towards more endemic manufacturing. The story I hear is that manufacturing left America, leading to joblessness, unemployment, drugs, and crime. The way we cure this is we give them jobs. The uber rich, as in Bezos and Elon Musk, have the money to do more. They have the power, and we all ought to know corporations help pay significantly for the US administration. My advice is we tax the uber-rich billionaire corporations, especially the ones over $50 billion in net worth. Tax them in their net annual profits unless they move manufacturing back to the US and create jobs in the Great Lakes Rust Belt. And for now, let smaller companies still trade with China to not drastically upset the US economy too quickly. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. We used a new tax on big billionaires to incrementally, gradually lower taxes on working class folk, the 90+%, while gradually taxing the big boys more and more each year's unless they move more manufacturing to the US. We use some money, should there be excess, to fund smaller businesses, so they can better compete with the big boys, cut prices, maintain or increase quality of products and services, pay and treat workers better. When the smaller businesses are rising, the big boys will have more competition. They'll compete fiscally and economically to also cut better deals for workers and consumers, bettering working class common folk as a whole, just as always intended. Millionaires are still a thing, and we only tax or increase taxes when we need to. As long as there's a decent economy and free market, then it works. Yes, free market. We have an oligopoly right now, run by corporations. I would like there to be no such concentration of commercial power at all. If there's a war, we do as we did in either world war. Make products for the good guys, sanction and pressure the bad guys until the bad guys give up. Because our economy was fantastic in either post-war period, and during the war there was better racial and sexual equality, which would make me very happy. So a better economy, and I'd suggest a new government, a largely new Congress, remove many older politicians, influx young blood with idealism, straight eyes, and clean hands. Influx women too, since women kind of lean more into compassion than men who traditionally are more self-centered business folk working to make cash in high rank. We can still have some old folk in Congress, but more folks in their 20s wouldn't hurt. This would be to try and uproot corruption, at least largely. I do believe there is a significant conservative old guard in US Congress that is a major negative influence on our politics and policies and drags America's heels behind the other good nations in Europe and Canada. I'd like to catch up to them somewhat. Let me know if I can be regional governor for New England, or maybe even Secretary of State. I'd be happy to help oversee the process. I don't want to be a millionaire and super wealthy, just enough wealth for needs plus some more for emergencies and to help my family. In the 2010s economy, I'd only want $80,000 to $100K at most. Any more, and I become the monster I want to destroy. So Bezos, you can still be a millionaire, but no more than that. I want a fair economy, gradual slope from lower to middle and upper class, not super spike to Zion and beyond. No thanks. Fair 50s, 60s economy with civil rights of today, please and thanks. In the end, I just want to live in peace. Someplace quiet, not have to worry about money much, but not rich. More money, more problems. I'm happy being a mortal on Earth. Have fun though, big shots. Okay, thanks. Bye.